Following today's report, do you have any regrets about calling Ottawa protesters a fringe minority?
Yeah, I wish I had said that differently. As I look back on that and as I've reflected on it over the past months, not just freshly from this commissioner's report, I wish I had phrased it differently. The fact is, there is a very small number of people in this country who deliberately spread misinformation and disinformation that led to Canadians' deaths, that led to excessive hardship in people who believed them. I continue to be very, very firm against those individuals. But that is a small subset of people who were just hurting and worried and wanting to be heard. And as much as I tried to emphasize throughout the time that, of course, we're always going to stand up for freedom of speech and freedom to protest peacefully, I wish I hadn't said something that was able to be spread larger. If I had chosen my words a bit careful, been more specific, I think things might have been a bit easier.
I can't believe his gaslighting BS. First of all, he says that, I wish I had phrased it differently that one time that I said it, not the 20 other times that you said it. And then he says, we respect everybody's right to choose. Except you didn't give them a choice. It's not a choice if it's coercion. It is not a choice if they are being vaccinated against unemployment instead of a disease. Because that's what ultimately it came down to. Exactly. That's not a choice.
Yes. And this is after months and months of that. It's not like as soon as these mandates came into place, the convoy happened. There was all of these other efforts to try to get him to reason. And then he was saying over and over that people who felt this way, in addition to the people who were coerced and still had their jobs, were not just extremists, misogynists as well, a small fringe minority. And he didn't say some of them. He said many or most of them were these things.
Yes. Yeah.
And what about that?
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, they said they were protecting us from people who had like ideology that was extreme or whatnot. When he said, again, anybody who was unvaccinated was an extremist, pretty much is what our prime minister said.
Yes.
I think that his own MPs are maybe like, I'm just guessing that maybe they're like, you have to tone it down with this. Like you have to say something there. And maybe that's why we saw this sad excuse of saying that he would have said it differently.
There were points at which he said where he was raging against people, like where he was visibly angry with people. So this is not just like, I said it clumsily. Oh, forgive me. I'm just a dumb drama teacher. Again, I say I would probably cut him that slack, but he said it like 20 times. He also said we didn't want to invoke the Emergencies Act.
I know. That was laughable.
It reminded me of like a wife beater where he's like, I didn't want to punch you in the face, but you didn't listen to me the first time. That was immediately my response there, because they did want to. We saw the documents in the Public Order Emergency Commission. It was like the first thing they thought about was like, do we get to use it on them now? Like they weren't even in Ottawa yet. And they're like, let's Emergency Act them.
And he didn't talk to them. He hid in his ivory tower. He never talked to the people. Like when we had no choice. We had to keep people safe. And this is how we felt. He said the word felt. We had to do it. How about talking to the Canadians that showed up once you realize, oh, shoot, this isn't a small fringe minority. Maybe you could address some of their concerns before you invoked the Emergencies Act. But you're right. They were so eager to press that button. It wasn't even funny. And it isn't funny. And here we are later just hearing that it's justified. But there were some good questions. I'm thankful that there was a Q&A and there was a couple of good questions out of that. Like, is this a failure of I can't say the word
federalism.
Federalism.
As an Albertan, I would suggest yes, because it showed us how little we actually need the federal government, because the blockades were over in Alberta when they called the Emergencies Act, and they wouldn't help us, even if in whatever way that our provincial government asked for it. We needed tow trucks. They wouldn't give us tow trucks that were sitting on the base in Edmonton, the CAF base. They wouldn't give us those tow trucks. So the provincial government just went out and bought their own. They realized the help was never coming. And so Justin Trudeau, when somebody asks him, is it a failure of federalism? Maybe, but as an Albertan, I think it's probably a reason we don't need federalism.
Yeah, good point. There's just so much in there. And then Freeland comes up there and says, we have to remember we did this so that nobody could get hurt. It's like, no, that's how people got hurt. You literally hurt people by invoking that. You trampled people. Our very own Alexa Laveau got shot with that. So like, they're just, for people who haven't watched the other side of the story, they're probably just eating these phrases up. Like, oh yeah, it was extremists. They were going to hurt us and nobody got hurt. And so this was the better cause. But the reality is people were there for 3 weeks without getting hurt.
Yeah. Only when the Emergencies Act got invoked did people start to get hurt, and that violence was coming from the government side. The part that really I find chilling, and I mentioned this in my monologue today because I'm filling in for Ezra on the Ezra Levant show, is the fourth recommendation of the commissioner, and that is to reform the law. We've only ever used this law one time in 30 years. And we didn't even use it when a terror cell was running amok in Toronto in the early 2000s, plotting bombing attacks. We didn't use it then. But the one time they did use it, he wants to reform the law. To what? Yeah. To obviously make it even more vague and easy to use, because the law is actually very specific. They're pretending like it's vague for some reason, but the law is very specific and it has to rise to Section 2 of the CSIS Act. It didn't, but they're all pretending like, well, it could be this, could be that. No, there's none of that in the law. So when they say reform the law, they mean to make it more gray areas, a little bit more fringe around the edges, so that you can basically whip this thing out whenever you want, whenever you're embarrassing Justin Trudeau on the international scale. I think that's what's going to happen here. And some of the suggestions from Rouleau, like a media, like a social media monitoring agency. Oh dear. To make sure we're using social media appropriately. That Justin Trudeau is going to jump right on that. And he said, we're going to examine the recommendations and we're going to adopt as many of them as we can. So by the way, before I'm going to sign off here at 2 Mountain, which is 2 minutes from now, and Alexa Lavoie is going to jump in. She was in the media lockup, and I think we might even have a lawyer willing to come on and talk to, whoever's left after I'm gone. But when did you know the fix was in? Because I'll tell you when I knew the fix was in. I thought Rouleau might be fair in the beginning, but it was when I was in Ottawa. That way. Yeah. I knew the fix was in when I was in Ottawa, and I watched the lawyers that I was sitting behind groan as they were getting documents relating to the witness they were currently examining. They were only getting the disclosure as the witness was testifying after they've had like 9 months and a delay, and entire government ministries dedicated to information disclosure. They were only getting these documents as they were examining the witness. And when the lawyers complained, they couldn't even get Justice Rouleau to say, that's unfair. Can't do that. He wouldn't even issue a ruling. He threw out a lawyer who wanted a ruling.
It's not just 1 or 2 documents too. It's a ton of stuff that they have to go through. I think something that stood out to me a lot was when they said that didn't they say that there were some areas that would be discussed away from the lawyers? Like they wouldn't even have information. They said it was for our own national security that they couldn't hear.
Yes.
But it's like, well, what was discussed behind closed doors by Trudeau and everything like that? So that was a big one for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Same for me. Just it felt at times when I was watching the commission that Rouleau was losing control of what was happening and that the lawyers didn't respect him because how could they? How could they? I mean, it was so obvious that the government was playing games with the evidentiary process and they were completely getting away with it. And that was his job as a commissioner, was to make sure that that stuff didn't happen. So that's when I knew, no, this isn't fair. It's not going to be fair. And none of this matters because we are going to come to a certain conclusion.
So do we know how much money has gone into this public inquiry? Because I know with the mass shooting in Nova Scotia, it's millions of dollars. Like how much money went into getting him told that he was justified?
I don't know.
We should look into that.
We should look into that.
Rebel investigates.
Rebel investigates multi-million dollars. I mean, I don't think we'll ever even know the full extent of the amount of people whose hands touched all of this. And just the sheer volume, like in Rouleau's decision today, he bragged about the sheer volume of documents that were released. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's a hell of a lot of documents to be releasing to the lawyers as they are examining the witnesses and expecting them to be able to examine the witnesses based on the information in the documents they just got. But
what's scary about this is it almost sets precedent of sorts to do it again the next time somebody disagrees with, the Trudeau government. And I think they used the wording of the act. It was appropriate and effective, which really reminds me of how they discussed COVID-19 vaccines. I won't say more than that because we're on YouTube, but it's that same wording. So you wonder if they make the revisions to it and then they have this ruling out of the commission, how quick will they do it next time? Maybe it's one weekend.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this is just, I really worry about those recommendations. And that was one of the things I talked to Keith Wilson, convoy lawyer, about, was when the recommendations come, because he thought, of course, they're going to find Justin Trudeau completely justified.
Yeah, exactly.
And he said, and then it's the recommendations that we have to worry about, because we know whether he was found to be justified or found to be unjustified, none of it matters. Justin Trudeau that faces no consequences for anything he's ever done. So it didn't matter. It's the recommendations that we should be very, very frightened of.
That's a clip from something we call Rebel News Daily. It's our daily live stream hosted by my friend David Menzies, but the show also includes a rotating cast of hosts and special guests, including me. It's a great way for us to talk about the news of the day as the news is happening in an unscripted fashion, and it's an awesome way for you to interact with us as well. We stream every weekday, 1 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Mountain, wherever you find Rebel News. See you there.